4th, 2021 Sewer Authority Midcoastside to order. And could we start with a roll call, please?
Director Penrose, you're muted.
Saw her.
Yep.
Here.
Okay. Director Lohman.
Here.
Director Clark.
Present.
Director Radback.
Here.
Director Slater Carter.
In attendance.
Chair Dye.
Here. All right. Could you introduce the members of the staff who are on this call, please?
Yes.
We appreciate having them here.
Perfect. We have Tim Costello, George Evans.
Well, tell us their position so that we know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Tim Costello is supervisor of field and treatment operations. Okay. Pretty much takes care of everything in the treatment plant and collections.
And the sharks.
Yep. George Evans, he's our finance officer. And then we have the treatment staff, Gabriel Aguilar, Sonia Andish, David Partida, and we also have Maz from City of Half Moon Bay. I thought I saw him.
I saw his name there.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, he was there, and he's supposed
He was
to.
there. Okay. And then we have our team from Brown and Caldwell. I can introduce them, and we are just about to address that in the agenda at a later time. We have Michelle, we have Greg, and of course, our General Counsel, Jeremy.
And I don't see Susan.
And who is
Susie should be joining a
Aaron
little late.
Hansen?
Come again?
Who is Aaron Hansen?
Aaron Hansen and Mike Harrison are both from Brown and Caldwell, and I'll introduce them to you guys when the agenda comes up.
Okay.
Agenda item
Good.
comes up.
Thank you. All right. Moving on. Let's move to do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
I have an announcement.
Okay.
SB 1383, which was passed a while back, are regulations on organic waste, and they have been finalized. This is not going to have a whole lot to do, I don't believe, directly with SAM, although it might be useful if people use their garbage disposals less. But it is on diverting organic waste from landfills. And so each of the member agencies needs to have its ordinance and procedures in order by January 1st, 2022 to deal with green waste and kitchen waste, food waste. And so we're working on 6 months left to make sure we get this into action. I know the trash companies are planning on implementing this in January of 2022. So we need to start telling the public about it and why. And we also need to be able to tell them why their rates are going up. It wasn't our choice, but this is all going to cost money for all of us.
So just to be clear, we will be starting composting services in
We will. Well, there's
Granada and
composting
Montero.
services.
So,
But
that's
if you look into it, it's far more intricate than just composting. We're going to have the composting picked up every week, and there's going to have to be rules. And let me see, according to Cal Recycle, we have to have a reporting record-keeping policy. We have to prepare and translate notices to educate people. We have to create waiver forms. I'm sure those are already done, and establish enforcement mechanisms. So it's more than just dumping your food waste into your green waste barrel.
right, but it affects the member agencies and not SAM.
It
Sam
does,
does
unless
not.
of course we can encourage people to put less food waste down their garbage disposal and put it in the compost.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Anything else? Any other? Rick, did you want to speak to an item not on the agenda?
Just real quick, I've seen a couple articles recently. This is interesting future technology. Somebody has discovered that sewer waste is actually warm coming down the pipes. And like, I forgot the name of the kind of air conditioner heaters that go outside and work on temperature differential. They are proposing heat pumps. They are proposing that sewer agencies can possibly look to the future and use the heat as a heat exchange to actually generate electricity. So it's free heat and free electricity. So that might be something we'll be looking at in the future, I hope.
Thank you. Any other comments for items not on the agenda? All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. Minutes, disbursements, revenue and expense report, and approval of a contract for species screening. Can I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on the consent agenda?
I'd like to ask one question about, I notice on the aging report that once again, Rocket Farms is running a $217,000 bill. Why does Rocket Farms get to owe the Sam $217,000 for a month? Is it some special deal they have or what?
No, they don't. Apologize. I'm not connected like I usually am, so I don't have the report in front of me. I don't remember seeing that. Rocket Farms does not owe us. They're actually up to date. So I'm not sure what exactly you're seeing. This is George. I'm sorry.
Why don't we bring back a report on that for our next meeting?
Will do.
Okay. Any other discussion of the consent calendar? Anybody want to pull anything? Sorry, I should ask that first, but whatever. No one does? All right, well then, can we have a roll call on the motion, please?
Yeah, before that, can I clarify? The 217,000 is not for the Rocket Farms, I think. I believe it's for the total, but anyway, we'll clarify it into the next thing. I tried to pull up the page, but it's not coming up. Okay, roll call, sorry. Director Penrose. Director Penrose?
She's muted.
Yes.
Director Lohman?
Yes.
Director Clark?
Aye.
Director Ryback?
Yes.
Director Slater Carter?
Yes.
Chair Dye?
Aye.
Yes.
Right.
Motion passed.
Moving on to regular business, we're going to start with a status update on wastewater treatment plant capacity and treatment process review, study by Brown and Caldwell. Can you give us the staff report?
Yes. Just to give you a background, sometime last year in the month of September or around late September, early October, we had plant upsets. We had high biochemical oxygen demand, which is popularly known as BOD. And there were a couple of violations at the plant where the effluent BOD was pretty high. And we noticed that that was a result of very high influent BOD and possibly coming from outside the plant. And therefore, we began to investigate that issue. And then we thought that we should have a system in place in the plant which could handle all such high upsets. And therefore, the board authorized SAM to go out for an RFP and look at engineering firms who could work on this process study and give SAM guidance on the wastewater treatment plant capacity and the treatment process. So the RFP was sent out, and Brown and Caldwell was the apparent bidder who had bid for this job and who was awarded the study. So they're halfway through their study now, and we've got a small presentation from Brown and Caldwell, and I have put together the status update in the staff report, but that'll be elaborated further by the team from Brown and Caldwell. So I'd like to welcome Mike Harrison from Brown and Caldwell and his colleague Aaron Hansen. And I will allow them to share their screen, and over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Keishan. As Keishan mentioned, we were fortunate to be selected by Keishan and the selection team. So we're really excited to work with you and work with your staff. So I'm going to pull up a presentation and kind of give you an update on where we're at. And hopefully it will come up with the magic. So once you guys see it, I'd love to get someone confirmed. I can continue. You see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, good. That's always a relief. I'm on a mobile hotspot, so I'm always a little nervous with the presentation. So I'll give you a little background. What we'll do is we'll give you an update on where Brown and Caldwell is at. But before I start, I did want to introduce Aaron Hansen, who is also part of the team who's doing quality control. So I'm the project manager for Brown and Caldwell, and I'll give you a run through of the update right now. So our agenda is, we're basically going to describe why and what we are doing. And I think that's important. Keishan already mentioned the high BOD. We will discuss the initial data summary. We've done a lot of evaluation of your Influent data and your plant process. Talk about operational recommendations. We've met with your staff a few times and it's been really good constructive work. And then the capacity assessment, that's kind of where we're at. We really wanted to get an understanding of what your plant is capable of treating before we then go through and figure out the best step forward. And then I'll summarize with a schedule and next steps. So project objectives, this slide should tell you, Keishan mentioned high BOD loading. So on the left, I have plant influent, and on the right, the plant effluent. And I circled the blue, and the blue represents all the data, the flow of BOD. I like to call it food for the bugs. The food, there is a sustained high level of BOD that entered the plant, well higher than normal. And it caused an upset, as you can see on the right side. The plant had an upset and actually violated, as Keishan mentioned. So we're trying to get a handle on that. Before we actually come up with solutions, we need to understand our baseline. So that's why what you want to do is determine the capacity. What is your plant capable of treating? To this point, I think operations staff has done a really good job of addressing it. This is not an easy thing. This isn't normal having the high load. So it's really kind of a collaborative effort with we bring our experience in on that and kind of work closely with staff on ideas. So this is what we're going to do. Task one, we did the data review. So we're essentially complete with that. The charts you've seen prior is some of the work that we've done. We've reviewed basically the operations. We do operator interviews with Tim and team and then do an inspection. The other thing we want to do is, get our eyes out there to see if there's anything that we can see that has any issues with the plant. So task one is that. Then the next step is once we review all the data, is to do a capacity of your plant. What is it designed to treat? Having that benchmark, then we can then go forward and figure out the best steps on addressing any of these high loads that may come into the plant and offer some suggestions for some optimizations and improvements on the best way to operate the plant that save ratepayers money on energy and make sure we have the most cost-effective alternative. That's what task 3 is. And then finally, we document that in basically a report. So that's and you'll see me again with those findings and summaries once we've gone through the steps. We're about halfway through and we're on task 2 and 3 right now. I just wanted to highlight, and forgive me if you know the plant well, but I just wanted to circle our focus on what we're looking at. The aeration tanks and secondary clarifiers are really the heart of the plant, and that's what we're focusing our efforts on. Indirectly, we're looking at the rest of the plant, but our job is to really look at that BOD issue and solve that problem with staff. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And this is what we've done. We're completed with this. So the data review is complete. We've conducted the visual inspections. We've done 2 in-person meetings. And with COVID, to me, it's a phenomenal achievement to get out in person. So myself, Aaron, three other members of the team that aren't here. Seppi Henneman and Linda Sawyer are our process design experts, so they understand the data. And then Lance Salerno is an operations specialist. So his job is to start up plants and seed them and do all that for us. So he's met with the staff a couple times. We've also had several just back and forth emails. So we've gotten a good understanding of how the plant operates. We've answered a lot of questions, and we're providing continual recommendations. So the 3 bullet points that I summarized here is really the big thing, and that's chlorination of RAS. To eliminate that now, and that's kind of a confirmation, and that's been happening. The solids retention time, what that means is how long the bugs stay in the system. So it's kind of a term you use on the age of the bugs. And what typically happens is there's a various, from a short amount of time to a long amount of time, there's an appropriate time that you want to run your plant at. And so we've kind of made some recommendations to adjust it to where it was before, and to make sure that we're basically operating at a stable process. That's very important. The plant likes to have stability, and it's really hard when there's varying influent loads and flows coming in. And then the final one is the chemical feed adjustments. Right now, if you can imagine, the flow in the plant isn't steady. It goes up and down over time. And some of the chemical feeds are steady. So what happens is if you feed steady, when the flow goes high, you're feeding less chemicals. When the flow goes over, you overfeed. So there's some recommendations we'll have on what's called flow pacing to feed the right amount of chemicals, and that'll be part of our ultimate recommendations. But that's where we're at right now. The next step, so the capacity analysis, that's where really we use all of our tools. We use a couple of tools. I'll give you terms. BioWin, but basically it looks all the data and predicts what the plant is capable of treating. And that's important because we want to know what each of your capacities is to figure out the best combination of basins and clarifiers to be used at certain times. So this is an overview of the plant, and I've highlighted all the kind of the important processes and components of the plant. Starting with the left, you have old aeration tanks 1 and 2. Those are the, I'll say, original tanks. They have older aeration systems in it, and those are the ones that they originally used. And they went back to those 2 basins at one point. So those are the old ones that we're looking at. The next one that I show is the newer aeration tank 3. There's 3 and 4. 3 is actually outfitted with the equipment to actually treat the wastewater. It's fine bubble diffusers. What I mean by that is all the bugs need air, and the air delivered in aeration tanks 1 and 2 is very inefficient. They're big bubbles. The new tank is more efficient, has fine bubbles, and has more oxygen. So it operates more efficiently, and it's also a newer basin. And then aeration basin tank 4 is not equipped, but is adjacent. And they were designed as a pair, but they didn't put the equipment in at that time at the first, during that expansion. And then the clarifiers are where everything settles. So those are important because the big challenge is the secondary clarifiers is where everything settles out. So if the term TSS or total suspended solids, that's where you want to look at it to see if you have capacity there. But you have to look at the system with all these together. You can't look at it one by one. That's what the modeling's for. And so that's what we're looking through right now. Preliminary results, all kind of the capacity, I'll explain this below. We've completed the modeling, and I mentioned the BioWin and state point analysis. So those are 2 tools that we use to assess capacity. Right now, aeration tank 3, the fine bubble one, is about right at capacity where it matches your capacity, a little bit over, but not a whole lot of flexibility on it. The capacity for aeration tank 1 and 2, the older ones, each tank is 40% less capacity compared to basin 3. So they're a little bit inefficient. So the bar below, I'll explain. So the left bar is basically what's coming into the plant. So it's represented with the BOD. Like this is the pounds of food that's coming in. So this is it, 3,700 pounds per day. The next chart over is aeration tank 3 only. So that basin by itself is around 4,000. So it actually has just enough capacity, but zero redundancy or flexibility. So I'll just point that out. The next bar over is aeration tanks 1 and 2 combined. So those are both tanks. And as you can see, if you put them both on, it's high. But I will qualify that those are old basins that would require some expensive retrofitting to make them functional and have the full purpose. So just keep that in mind. And then the far right is if you do improvements to make sure flow goes to all the aeration tanks, you'll have the capacity that's shown there, which is over 7,000. So that's kind of the snapshot we needed to take to actually then go through the next step of assessing the best approach that we want. And we have some early conclusions, that we can talk a little bit about. So here it is tank 3 is really the appropriate tank to be using. The fine bubble, you've recently replaced the diffusers, so they're fresh and nice and they're ready to go. And it's actually a better technology compared to 1 and 2. 1 and 2 is older diffused air that's just not quite as operational efficient to run. So it's all about operational efficiency. You could run all 3 tanks, 1, 2, and 3 at the same time. It's not possible unless there's some significant modifications to the plant. So that would be estimating cost to figure out how to reroute flows so it can be done efficiently. So that's one conclusion. We looked at the gates and the channels and interviewed Tim and the operations on that. So that's one thing. And I think that the aeration tank 4, outfitting that is your biggest bang for the buck. And what you want it for is redundancy. So if you just have aeration basin 3 and no backup, you'd have to run 1 and 2 again, which is a major issue trying to bring that over. So by outfitting aeration tank 4, you have a backup. And ideally, you want to take a basin out of service to look at the diffusers, typically, ideally annually, to be able to drain it, to take a look at the buried things underneath the liquid to make sure the diffusers are operating well and doing all that. That's just kind of normal maintenance. So the redundancy aspect is really important to the plant. And then you have 2 also. So if there's an event of a super high event, you have both basins to run. So what we're going to do, though, we do have some options for tanks 1 and 2, and that's some creative options that we're going to work with staff on. You can use those tanks for equalization. So what that could do is stabilize the flow going into the subsequent tanks. And like I mentioned before, the bugs like stability. So that will definitely help any of the crazy spikes and peaks that you'd have going into 3 and 4. There's some other creative changes that we can talk about that I think we'll get more into detail, but I'm just super excited that we got the first part done and we're going to be moving on to look at those alternatives. But this is sort of a snapshot and some preliminary recommendations that we have right now. So next steps, we're gonna really look at basins 1 and 2 and really I try to figure out the best way, if there's a really cost-effective way of using them for equalization that'll basically save money. So we're going to be costing all these options out to see how that will be. So that's a big part of it, is once we do the alternatives, we're going to cost things out to figure out what's the best bang for the buck for the district. We have a couple more workshops with operations staff, and I apologize, I'm actually kind of late with the next one, which is the capacity. So I'm glad that most of them are on the Zoom meeting so they get a preview of it. But we're going to sit down with them closely and go over the capacity so that it's confirmed. We kind of value their opinion because they run the plant and they have a really good knowledge of that. So it's more of confirming that. We're also going to introduce some of those ideas and recommendations that we've been listening to them as well on those options. So we're going to have 2 future workshops. We're going to basically run through that, come up with some cost estimates. I understand there's probably costs in your CIP that we'll be looking at, trying to make sure that what we're going to do is appropriate and provides the stability for the plant. And then you'll be ready for the BOD coming in. One thing, we can't control, we always say this, is you can't control what comes into the plant, right? There's some things you can do. So you need to be ready at the plant. So that's the big thing. So the goal for the whole timeline is, I understand the July 26th meeting, we're really shooting for that to be a really presentation of the options for you. So you can kind of go through and understand the costs, the options, and the recommendations. So you kind of have a backup with that, so you can understand that. So that's it. This is the project schedule that we're on. So it lists all the tasks on the left. the red line kind of shows where we're pretty much at. We're a tad behind. If you look at task 200, we're pretty much done with 200. But we really need to get that unit process capacity workshop that I mentioned. So it's on the 27th, but I'm going to schedule that so it's at a more convenient time for the operations staff, so we can spend some time really kicking the tires and making sure that we're on the same page with that. One thing I've really noticed is if operations staff does a great job, but we want something they want to operate. It makes no sense on coming up with some things that just doesn't feel comfortable. So it's really good to just kind of bounce ideas, and it's been really good so far. We've had some really good question answer sessions, and I've been really happy with the participation of the staff. They've done a really good job, and they have a lot of good questions for us. And they're challenging us. They're asking some good questions. They're bringing up some ideas. We're taking it back to our office with other folks and kind of going back and forth. So, but this is a timeline. We're about halfway through based on this, and I'm really excited for the next task, which is the fun stuff, right? This is when you really get creative and make sure that you come up with the right solutions for the staff. So that's it. Really short and sweet for everybody, but I wanted to just open it up for questions from the board. I'm free to open questions, and I also have Aaron Hansen here in case I say something really bad. He can correct me. So that's his job. Got to have some questions. I know I wasn't that good, or did I wake you up? So
you're on mute, Barbara.
You're mute,
You're on
Barbara.
mute.
Yeah. It's Deborah, not Barbara. Yeah. Is it Barbara speaking or Deborah?
Deborah is calling on Barbara. I mean, Barbara is calling on Deborah to speak.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure. Yeah, I have a question. When you say that equalization tank 3 is at capacity, what happens if capacity increases? How do you deal with that? That's one question. My second question is, what other functions are you considering for tanks 1 and 2 besides equalization?
Sure. So at capacity means if you get higher than that, there's a high chance of violating your permit. So if you get higher numbers coming in, that's when we raise the white flag, and you can, the risk of violating goes up a lot when that happens. So that's really the main thing, is understanding what you're capable of, because that's kind of the basic thing. I think the last design didn't give operation a really good understanding, and it was kind of on them. So we want to start with what you should be capable of treating, kind of starting from square one and then looking back at that. So that's kind of what that means with the capacity. As far as other functions of basins one of the problems with the plant is there's a settling issue. So what happens is the bugs don't settle out, you get filaments, and that ends up impacting the effluent or the final. So one of the options also for basins 1 and 2 is to use it for, it's called a selection. It's actually using it as they are to create a different environment that would basically kill off the filaments and keep the good bugs. So keep the term selector. So there's some ideas that our process design folks are coming up with a creative way of doing that. And also with the load, with the equalization, you can almost use it as inline equalization, which means it goes through it first all the time and goes out, or it's offline equalization. What that means is that you would have a tank that you go to as soon as there's an issue, almost like emergency storage per se. So if there's an idea where the staff is saying, hey, we have an idea of an upset or something's happening, you can use those basins as sort of temporary storage to give yourself some time to react. So those are some uses of basins 1 and 2. But what we want to do is not strand assets if there's a way to use it. However, the cost of just repurposing them and not, if they don't get used efficiently, that's also not good either. So we want to make sure it's a functional thing that we provide. And then the more thing is the cost to actually create that new function for those basins. So that's one of the things we're going to look at. I hope that answers your question, Deborah.
It does. I guess I still am a little bit confused about capacity. Are
Okay.
you saying that we've got tank 3, and that's at capacity when it operates? So we need at least tank 4 or tank 1 and 2 to take some of the pressure off tank 3.
That's correct. That's correct. You need the number one, you need the redundancy. That's the one thing is, most plants have that redundancy, but it also gives you that additional capacity in case you get another unexplained high BOD load coming in.
Sure.
You can put them both on. And that's really the conclusion is when you say add capacity, that's why. So there's kind of two reasons, the redundancy and that you need more capacity for that.
Okay, good, thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would like to. Can I supplement? Can I supplement Mike's answer to Director Penrose on the use of aeration basin 1 and 2? We could possibly use one as an equalization tank, and the other one could be used for recycled water whenever the project kicks off.
Okay, Catherine, did I see you wanted? Thank you, Kishan. Thank you.
You did, and this might be a bit of an early question, and so I might be looking for an answer later, but I'm interested in the cost comparisons between connecting the flow for aeration, I think it is, to 1, 2, and 3 together, which you said could be quite expensive, or the cost of turning basin number 4 into an aeration basin. I'd like to know what the relative costs of those of looking at those two options. And I think redundancy is an important thing that has been often put aside for SAM. And I think looking at the various redundancies that we have and need are going to be important information to have as well.
Yeah, good question, Catherine, on the cost. It's a little early. We have I think we have some preliminary information from Kishan on the diffusers for 4, but we haven't really fully vetted that cost. And we're just beginning to understand how we need to make those improvements to allow 1, 2, and 3. So we don't have that yet, but for sure, that's one of the first things we're going to be looking at and getting those costs. We're going to lay out the options, and we have an estimator, like a cost person, that's going to do like 4 different types of projects. And the 2 you mentioned are the ones those are 2 for sure. And there'll be some others as well. So we'll have that information later. And that's something, once we have some preliminary information, I mean, I'm more than happy to update, anytime. This, Zoom is nice to me, so I don't mind it. So I can work with Kishan if there's a interim update, if you're interested in it. But we're very anxious too to see how that is. The question is, we're still trying to come up with the basis for that project for splitting the flow. So we understand it can happen, but we still have to kind of put together how big is the box? Where can it physically fit on your footprint? The site's not very big. So, that also increased cost because you have to put it someplace less than ideal. It may cost more. So those are some of the things that we're looking at right now.
Wait, what box are you talking about putting somewhere?
Yeah. So when you look at, Barbara, when you split flows to all 3 basins right now, ideally, the box would function to actually split the flows equally to each of those basins. So you need to create a structure separate because right now they have these gates that don't quite provide flow. Each basin requires a different flow. Basins 1 and 2 have different capacity than 3. So you have to think through and have the ability to bring flows, the right amount of flows in each basin to do that. So that means you need I call the term a splitter box in order to allow that efficiently. So that's what that box meant when I said the box.
So in addition,
concrete structure.
And
I have one more question, and that is, you mentioned that basins 1 and 2 are like really old. I think they are going on 40 years old.
Correct.
And Basin 3 is probably going on 20 some years old. And I'm sure looking at all the new technology and improvements in just about everything from knitting needles to water treatment plants and skis and so on, there's just amazing updates. I'd like to know what it would cost to bring some of these things up so that we can actually get replacement parts for them that are actually held in stock instead of, like, so often things have had to be customized, as in retrofitted to retrograde standards for the SAM plant. And I think I would like to see this SAM board be taking the position that we need to be bringing things up to current technology so we can get replacement parts for another 20 years, because the replacement parts are no longer available, and it's going to cost more in the long run to be hand making replacement parts than to upgrading things now. We've got to keep this plant going for, I believe, at least another 10 or 15 years. So I'd like to see that somewhere in your commentary.
Yeah, good comment, Catherine. We term that obsolescence, right? So that's a risk, obsolescence risk. Commenting on the basins, they're old, but actually the concrete's in pretty good condition. You can get 100-year life out of concrete structures if you take a look at it, inspect it, and do the coating. So that's good. But you mentioned the equipment inside, and that's a challenge, right? And it's not an unusual situation where it gets obsolete and you are stuck with old things and trying to improvise, doing MacGyver, and Sonia's trying to figure out the piping and what do we weld it or what? So the fine bubble diffusers, they're not the super cutting edge. But fine bubble aeration is. It's been around, it's established, it's way more current than coarse bubble. It's actually something you could get parts. You could get spare membranes. And when you could have some on hand. So if there's an issue every year, when you go and take it down, you can replace some, do some inspection. You get good, decent life on that. Usually 7 to 10 years is the life of the membranes. And the technology has been going pretty well. When you get into the more elaborate technologies, that's when you have to weigh the costs of that, because there is, the newer technologies do cost more, but I agree that the fine bubble diffusers is more current than what you have in basins 1 and 2. So I think that's a good thing. The other thing about the modern technologies, a lot of it is about instrumentation. One of the things that would help a lot in operations is to have more instrumentation to really help control that. That's where a lot of the technology is going these days, is a lot of the automation and instrumentation. So it's funny, the diffusers have been around a lot, but they've evolved. Now they're fine bubble membranes. They're established. There's lots of spare parts. There's a lot of equals. So it's easy. They got EDI, I think, replaced for the other one. So that's a good one. So those are good comments on that. And obsolescence is a big deal. And it's something we're working with staff. That's one thing that'll come out is if you're making your own parts, that's typically a time where you need to modernize, unless you enjoy it. But I think there's other things the plant staff wants to do. So, yeah,
All
good
right,
comment.
I have a couple questions here. It's my understanding that Basin 3 has just had all of its fine bubble diffusers replaced, and it's been upgraded. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I think we're in the process. We've been talking with operations staff on bringing that back into service now that that's in place. So
we have invested in that major upgrade for Basin 3. Now, Basin 1 and 2 have a greater capacity in terms of the volume they can handle than Basin 3. Correct?
Yes, they're each Basin 1 is 1, Basin 2 is 1, and Basin 3 is 1.4. Correct.
And so when the BOD issue happened, the staff decided to use. They needed to keep as I understand it, keep the volume in the plant longer, and they needed more, therefore more capacity. So they shifted over to basins 1 and 2, and that enabled them to drain basin 3 and do the replacement, which was something that had been needed for a while. But
Correct.
But basins 1 and 2 have the coarse diffusers. What is the cost? Or I understand that there need to be, well, let me just switch a little. If 1 and 2 have more capacity and we have 3 upgraded, we now have 3 basins. If we were to spend the money on this extra concrete, instrumentation function, would those 3 basins provide the capacity to handle a variety of problems in the plant?
Technically, it's possible, but I think that's the cost that we need to factor in to see what's less expensive. Again, that was the big thing. Do you try to create this concrete structure, an elaborate thing, and use 1 and 2? I guess my sense is those basins are older than 3, so you have that. So that's the big question. I think we're going to find, and we haven't validated this, it'd be more cost effective to actually outfit 4 and use 3 and 4 than it is to do 1, 2, and 3. So that's what we're going to kind of fine tune. But I think in general, if you look at that, the other thing is, if you look at it, in order to make it easy to switch over, that's the other issue, is it's not an easy effort to just switch these basins over. And so there's some plumbing changes we'd have to make as well to make sure it's operational friendly to do that. Right now, it's kind of a challenge. I mean, they have to use temporary pumps and there's a risk to that. It's something you don't take lightly because, you don't want violations. That's just money. So we will look at that for sure, Barbara, in terms of that.
Well, I thought what you said earlier was that if we had 3 and 4 both working, that you would use 1 as kind of a special treatment area, and
correct.
2 would be available for recycled water. But then wouldn't you have the same kind of problem of getting the wastewater into basin 1 when you're using 3 and 4?
No.
Actually, it's a little different because 1's in line. So it's like it's going through it to the other one. So it's all set up for that already. It's if you had to split the flows amongst them is where the challenge is. So if you can imagine, it's going through 1, ideally through 1, and then to 3 and 3 and 4. 3 and 4 were kind of designed for that, in tandem for the flow split. The 1 and 2 aren't. So that's why you could just run the flow through 1 and then go to 3 and 4. That's the concept. But there's cost to that too. It's not something you can just do right now. We need some type of pump, some other ideas. So we're going to come up with a kind of a project to do that. But that would actually buffer the plant and allow them to run 3 and perhaps 3 and 4 smoothly. It'll handle a lot of those peaks and valleys. And I think that's what would be needed. The variations in flows and loads are just not a good thing for stability of the plant.
Can I jump in for a second here,
Yeah,
Mike?
Tim.
And I think, Barbara, you're coming in tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, and I can kind of walk you through things. One thing that we had talked about with the state last time we had gotten our MPDS permit was when we were looking at recycled water, and if it's truly something that this board wants to do, recycled water.
Yes.
Well, if it is, we are going to have some sort of flow equalization in that facility. There's no way with the flow fluctuations in our tiny wet well, our tiny influent wet well, that we can stabilize the process well enough in order to operate a recycled water facility properly without having so many backwash cycles going on that you're not going to produce the water you need to produce. So we're going to have to do something like Mike is referring to, retrofitting 4 so it's functional as a mixed liquor aeration basin, and then having some sort of equalization to stabilize the process. We need to stabilize it somehow. Like I said, but that's only if you guys are really serious about recycled water. If you're not serious about that, then it doesn't matter. Do whatever you want to do.
No, we want to do the right thing for Sam. That's what we're just trying to understand.
That's
And, this preliminary work, one more question I have, and then I guess we can move on. But I don't understand how 3 and 4 would be used together. I assume that 4 would be fitted with the same new fine diffusers that have just gone into 3. And then if 3 is big enough to handle everything, would 4 just be a backup, or would you be using somehow the 2 together?
You can use both together. So that's something we're going to take a look at. Ideally, and this is how a lot of plants are, is during higher flows, you have both in service because there's more volume, and then in the summer, you take one off. You might be a little different, but you would use both.
We're only running on
times.
3 pretty much all the time now, except for when the BOD happened, we moved to 1 and 2. But we're just running on 3 for what, a decade or more.
Right.
I'm not objecting to this. I'm just trying to understand it. So what would 4 do for us except provide, is it just for redundancy, or would it help with the process?
It'll help with the process. A lot more flexibility too, because right now it's a lot, those are designed together so that you would actually expand, once you want to switch it over, it's a lot easy to switch over to that basin. You'd move your inventory over and all is good. Those are kind of designed in tandem. But the redundancy is kind of the important thing. Is you can break an airline. There's some things that can happen. I'm not saying it's gonna. It's one of those things where you weigh the risk of operation to see if that's something you're willing to take in terms of that. So, it's as a conservative engineer, I'm very sensitive to the price of it. It's really the most cost effective. I just feel, if you run into the same thing where you have basin 3 only, and you get a crazy spike in BOD, you could put both basins on, call it good, you're done. There's some things you can do during the other times of the year. If it's predictable, we don't know. I mean, that's the one thing we don't know, but just having that for capacity and backup and redundancy is just kind of the standard practice that we would recommend for sure. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Greg Dieguez has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. From looking at the graphs you provided of influent and effluent, it looks like the BOD problem's gone away, but I'm wondering if it was solved. Was the entirety of the problem the influent, or was there a change in the treatment, for example, in the aeration process, which contributed to the excess influent, and that has been changed?
There's been some changes to treatment. The thing we saw with that was that it was a settling problem. So, if you look at the effluent, there's been the TSS also was high, which is the settling issue. So I think plants always struggled with what they're called filaments that are in there. And it's tough to manage, but it's hard to say if that's solved, because there's been a few other things they're working through right now that they're trying to work out. So it's hard. I don't think they've solved it. I think if that happened again, they'd have a very similar response that they have. That's the concern part. And the reason I know this is that's why we did the capacity evaluation, to kind of show you, like, hey, yeah, you are at it. So if something that much higher comes in, this is what happens. It creates a plant upset. So that was the main reason why we wanted to make sure we did the capacity first, to go, what are you capable of treating? We're also going to run, just to answer your question also, is we're going to run some kind of modeling scenarios where we have some different spikes and see how the plant responds, just to confirm. But we're pretty comfortable with that capacity number. So I don't know if that problem's solved at this point. I'd say there's still a little bit of apprehension on that. There's a lot of moving parts in terms of that. And that was one of the things working with ops. But if you had another high spike at BOD, I think there's going to be some challenges.
Kishan, would you
Kishan.
like to speak? Yes.
Yes, I'd like to clarify further to Greg that the change in process was done after the fact that the BOD was high. We received high influent BODs, and therefore we had to address it. And then we took aeration basin 3 offline and went to 1 and 2 to get extra capacity. So it was not that the change in process resulted in that. It was the first one, the high BOD which occurred, which resulted in us changing the process to take care of that instantaneously.
All right. Any further questions on this? All right. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to the next agenda item.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mike and Aaron, for the lovely presentation. And
Yes, thank you so much.
thank you very
Michael.
much. Yep.
Thank you.
Aaron.
Yep. Treatment plant staff. We've almost
do
got.
it for you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, we've almost got 100% attendance from the treatment plant staff, and you can see that how eager, how anxious they are to get this thing rolling. So that's why we have
That's great.
almost
Thank you
everyone
for
out
being
here.
here.
Thank
for-
you very much.
Yes. And I do want to emphasize that Basin 3 is it almost complete, or is it complete with the retrofitting of the new fine diffusers, which is a big deal because they were 20 years old and had not had any maintenance because you couldn't, because it
You want
was
me to-
working the whole time, right?
Want to take that, Kishan, or you
Yeah.
want to take it?
No, go ahead, Tim. Elaborate on how difficult it is to.
Oh my God! So
Go ahead.
Basin 3. So we thought it was going to be pretty straightforward, right? Because they were 9-inch diffusers. They're like an HDPE diffuser, a little rubber guy down there, and we thought it was going to be pretty straightforward. We sent EDI the information and and pictures and stuff, and they looked at it and they went, okay, this seems pretty straightforward. Until we got it all the way down, and then it turned into something that wasn't as easy as we thought it was going to be. So it started out, we thought they were just basic round diffusers, and they are, but they were actually AeroCore was the manufacturer of that diffuser. So AeroCore is no longer around. They were out of business. They were bought out by Sanitaire. But all the information we had was based on Sanitaire, because Sanitaire pretty much bought out whatever AeroCore had on the shelf, I'm guessing at a song. So when this project was going on, they got a really good deal and they said, oh, we'll put this in and it'll work for now and it'll be good and, for the next 15 years. So I felt bad for the guys at EDI because they sent the diffusers out only to find out that the diffusers they sent wouldn't work with the backing plate because the backing plate was domed. So the diffusers wouldn't fit over a stretched backing plate. So we had to replace all the backing plate to a flatter backing plate. And then since we had to replace the backing plate, the retaining ring on top didn't hold everything as tight as it needed to be held. So EDI had to send out a bunch of big giant O-rings to create a spacer so that everything was tight, so that the diffusers would tighten up. I mean, it was supposed to be, they thought when they bid the project originally, they thought it was going to be like 3 days. And those poor guys were down in that basin for probably close to 2 weeks.
I saw them down there with their hip boots and working away at feeling things. It looked like, what a way to make a living.
Oh, it was, yeah. But
And
the short answer is
another state, right?
Yeah, they were from Missouri.
Missouri.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, all the diffusers are replaced and it's functional now. And it's about a quarter full of water because we can't cascade the water when we put it in. We can't cascade the water onto the diffusers for fear that we might fracture them because it is 20-year-old plastic parts. So we want to make sure they stay safe. So we put about a quarter flow of water, and then we've talked to the BC guys, and we're trying to figure out a game plan of how exactly we're going to switch everything so we can get it up and running and get it online. So we're not there yet, but we're getting there.
All right. Well, thanks for all your hard work on this. Anything else on this topic? All right, moving on to item B, declare 3 SAM vehicles as surplus and authorize general manager to dispose of them as per the SAM purchasing policy.
Yep. So we have 3 SAM vehicles which are in pretty bad condition. You've seen the photographs and the details of it in your packet in the staff report. These are SAM 1, 3, and 5. We've already got replacement vehicles for these, and these are surplus equipment. So we'd like to follow the purchasing policy and dispose it off. And staff is here to answer any questions. The photographs are as evident clearly as to how old they are and how badly they are being attacked by the corrosion in the atmosphere.
Catherine,
So moved.
is there a second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion? I do have a question, which is, I know we've talked a number of times about having some kind of protective structure over the vehicles. I mean, these vehicles are very old, and I'm totally in support of the idea of surplusing them. However, they don't have a whole lot of miles on them. And I wonder if part of the problem is that they're exposed to the air and the rain and so forth. And where do we stand on the idea of adding some protection to the vehicles?
Yeah, we are working on that, and we'll probably bring it back to the board at a later date with cost details.
Okay, great. All right, any further discussion on the motion? Can we have a roll call, please?
Director Penrose,
Yes.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Radback,
Yes.
Director Slater Carter,
Yes.
Chair Dye.
Yes. All right, moving on to general manager's report.
Okay, before I go on to the manager's reports, I would request George Evans to clarify Director Clark's question that he had on Rocket Farms. I believe George has done his research and he's ready to clarify Director Clark's questions. George?
Could I clarify? I just sent Kishan and George an email saying whoever said I was wrong on that was correct. Bottom line as the bottom line of the Rocket Farms account.
Okay, so this is mostly for everybody else. Director Clark, I assume that once I told you that I was confident that that number was incorrect, you'd look at the report because you probably had it in front of you because you rattled off the right number for the entire accounts receivable. So as it happens, just for everybody else to understand who doesn't have the report, Rocket Farms happens to be the last customer on the list. And it's pretty small printing, and it's easy to see how that mistake could be made. But just so everybody out there knows, Rocket Farms gets a bill somewhere in the range of between $1,000 and $1,500 a month. They actually contact me if I don't get them a bill within the first 48 hours of the month. And they pay that probably by the end of the first week. And as a former business person, I just thought I'd put that out there in the public forum. But you are right, Director Clark. They are current. And by the way, this is a snapshot as of April 30th. That invoice, that one invoice that's sitting on their account has already been paid.
Great.
Good to know.
Thank you for the clarification, George.
No problem.
Okay, moving on further on the manager's report. At the last meeting, there was a request to add the details of the ocean outfall inspection. That has been added into the manager's report. If you have any questions, staff is here to answer that. We did carry out the annual inspection. We had a problem in one of the diffusers, diffuser number 33, which has clearly been mentioned in the report, and that has been fixed. And the other topic I'd like to mention is about the wet weather storage expansion project. The project is almost complete. We are planning on doing the hydro seeding this Friday. And there was a job walk last week, and a couple of punch list items have been addressed, and they hope to complete all that during this week and early part of next week. Any other questions on the manager's report or anything else? Me and my staff are here to address them.
Anybody else have questions? I have a question on the, day by day report. On 415, I just didn't understand this. It says, work on IPS locating to exposed line, heard that it could be deeper than was on the plans, reached out to CCWD for assistance with ground penetrating radar. And I wondered if Tim could just explain what's going on there. So I thought that seemed like an interesting bit of technology we might have to bring in to solve a problem.
So yeah, I reached out to the local agencies, be it Half Moon Bay or CCWD or, Montero, whoever we need to, whoever I know has expertise in the area. And I know Midcoastside County, actually, they have a ground penetrating radar device that they can drag along the surface, and then they know how to read it and look for anomalies. It's not something that we would want to purchase because the frequency that we would use it wouldn't offset the cost. But what happened is going off the as-builts when we were doing
Where is this?
On the IPS. So there was the one area that was by Spangler's where we used it. Did we use it up by the airport, Kishan? I don't know that they used it up there.
I think we used it only at the Spanglers, and this was primarily for the project which we are doing for the condition assessment of the force main.
Yeah.
So in order to carry out that project, we had to first locate the force main and then put a bracelet probe and do the electromagnetic inspection. So we had a tough time locating the pipes as per the as-built. That's when Tim sought the help of CCWD, and we got this ground penetrating radar and located the pipes.
Yep.
Great. Sounds like a good use of technology. Thanks.
Yep.
And then I noticed that, I don't know. I think I'll ask that offline. I don't have any other questions. Does anyone else have questions on the manager's report? All right, moving on.
I see Matthew.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
The damage to diffuser 33 and the outfall, how does something like that occur?
Oftentimes it's due to a boat dragging an anchor. If someone's out there fishing, they might drag an anchor. It might get bent over. And then if it gets bent over, it could get sanded up, and then we don't realize it until a year later when we're out there to fix them. But I've already reached out to the global driver fellows that did the inspection. I have some duckbill diffusers in stock. So we're going to coordinate next time they come out, and we're going to replace some of the ones that are a little bit older and look like they need replacement.
You sure it wasn't your sharks somehow, attacking them or something?
No, they're actually trained. There's one back there that has a saddle on it. I like to ride, but it's different.
Thank you, Tim. That was actually the only thing I could imagine would do that, is a dragged anchor. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, where the diffusers are, it's just sand out there. There's absolutely nothing else that could do it.
All right. Anything further on the general manager's report? Moving on to the attorney's report.
Yes, good evening, Madam President and board members. Just one thing to leave you with. There is going to be a lot of change over the next month as we transition from our current COVID regulatory structure to an open state of California, which the governor has stated is supposed to happen on June 15th. A lot of things are going to be in flux between now and then. You've got I just forwarded to the board this evening a letter. Read it at your leisure. It's not something you have to read, but it was a joint letter from the Association of California Water Agencies and a number of other trade associations urging the governor to provide a transition period to go from our current structure where most or many agencies are doing their meetings virtually like we are tonight, to one where we return back to the traditional Brown Act approach, where the only way you can participate remotely is by doing a separate agenda at the remote site and allowing the public at the remote site to participate. It's a very different approach, right? So a lot of the trade associations have asked for at least a 30-day transition period to allow agencies to kind of go back to the normal approach. So anyway, that's in play, and we'll keep the board updated as new information comes out from the governor's office. Additionally, there's going to be updates coming in from Cal OSHA as to working conditions, some of the things that are going to be changing potentially when the governor's office rescinds some of the prior restrictions. And anyway, there's going to be a lot of things coming our way. So I wanted to make the board aware that just stay tuned for our next meeting. There should be some very interesting information, and we'll keep you updated as we learn more.
Question, which is, it's my understanding that at one point there is legislation that requires us to continue to have Zoom capacity at the meetings.
Hasn't passed yet, though. Yeah, I mean, it certainly.
And I heard then special districts were exempted from that. So
yeah, I think there's multiple bills last time I'd heard about it, and I need to check in on that. But none of them have passed, and I don't envision they're going to pass by June 15th. And so, whatever there could very well be, and I think there's probably pretty broad support to have some form of continuation of the ability for participation in some virtual capacity. But what that ultimately looks like, I don't know. And when that'll be authorized, I also don't know. So that's something that'll be, we're going to learn a lot about. I'll check in on that prior to the next board meeting so that we have some update as to where that legislation is. But it's still relatively early in the session, so.
Seems complicated.
It is.
Yeah. All right.
It seems complicated, and of course it is, but having watched and been involved in a number of meetings, I'm impressed with how much more available public processes and decision making via Zoom for the public as well as board members. And so if we have any way to weigh in on this, either through our separate efforts as individuals or as a board, it's not often we get, for instance, the whole operations staff to be able to participate in a report. Because they've been at the plant all day and then they spread out and go home. And this way they could just sort of key in and participate. And I think it's important for all of the agencies to have that kind of public participation available.
And I don't think that's precluded. I think where you run into Brown Act problems or more rigidity is in the context of where do the directors physically have to be? Where does your decision-making body physically have to be? And so I think there's a lot of agencies do allow for, certainly they have video. Some agencies have video of board meetings. I have not seen, or I have not seen prior to COVID, participation like we have now. So I don't know whether there's going to be more of that. But it seems like, I think it's popular. I think you're not the first person that's mentioned that.
Oh, I'm sure I'm not.
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of board members and, interested members of the public, it definitely facilitates public participation.
It also makes it easier to be real honest, to be a board member and still have a life. For the huge amounts of money we get paid for all of these things, it's nice to be able to tell our family, well, yeah, let's just go and do that, and I can participate in the board meeting, on Monday night, but we can still go skiing on Tuesday.
Understood.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll look forward to more information on, physically, how do you set that up? How do we make it work? Moving on, director's reports. Do we have any director's reports? Rick?
Quick LAFCO report. We had a LAFCO meeting last Wednesday. remotely through Zoom. Two quick items. One, they passed the typical annual budget. It was almost identical to last year's budget. The budgets are divided in thirds. The county pays a third, cities pay a third, and special districts pay a third. So the bill to the city and our special districts will be essentially identical as it was last year. So there's no big change there. The other interesting item is following this East Palo Alto Sanitary District issue. The developers in the city of East Palo Alto launched a huge development plan, including everything, just lots of projects, went to the sewer district and said, what will this take to do it? And the sanitary district typically said, well, here's what it will cost. I don't know what the number was. I think it was like $7 million to expand the system. They said, oh, okay, well, make sure you pass that cost on to all of your ratepayers. The district said, what? We don't do that. That's not the law. So the city and the developers are pushing toward a plan they hope to dissolve the district. Instead of having a normal municipal service review, they have pushed forward an emergency one to move forward faster. And again, interestingly enough, the developers are paying for the municipal service review. LAFCO's role was to help select the professionals who will do it, but it's totally being paid by the developer to move this along. So it'll take several months to do that, but it's going to be interesting to see what the results of an MSR that are paid for by a developer, specifically to pass all of their costs on to the ratepayers, like nothing like that has ever occurred on the coast here, or from my conversations, any other special district in the county. Developers and cities always pay for the expanded infrastructure. If they were to have attempted, as they were told, well, you should have figured this out and expanded the infrastructure before, actually, they can't do that either, because putting in infrastructure more than your current needs is called growth inducing, which is a major law which you cannot break at the Coastal Commission. So news at the next round, because this will be interesting to follow how this works out for special districts. So
very interesting. If you have any write up on that, I'd like to see it.
it's going to take at least a couple of meetings, so it's probably going to take at least 3 or 4 months to get the whole thing through. But if we get updates every 2 months, I'll bring it up at the next meeting.
Oh, very interesting.
I have a question for Jeremy. Doesn't having the developer pay for the MSR put the reliability and impartiality of the municipal service review in question? I'm very.
I can see how someone would think so. I mean, it's. I think certainly that could be argued. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very concerned that this may be not even the first time it's happened, but it could be a growing trend in the state that can have some terrible effects for ratepayers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah.
But the LAFCO staff is the one who chose the MSR auditor.
Yeah, but that you've always heard that phrase, Harvey, follow the money.
All right.
No comment.
I don't know that we want to have a whole discussion of that. Moving on to topics for future board consideration. Any comments? We have a list in the agenda package. Anything you want to add or note? All right, moving on. I guess we are ready to move to closed session. Do we have a closed session tonight?
We do, just a very short one.
All right. So I will adjourn the public meeting to closed session and then reopen the public meeting after closed session.